Okay, so I'm gonna talk about our work, and it's very similar to what Angela was presenting about digitizing their records. Some parts and or issues that we have are say similar to that. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to talk about from our side of work at MASA project dealing with digitizing and modeling of data, especially legacy data in South Asia. As some of you might know that we at MASA project, we work in northwest of India and Pakistan, and we're using different method to identify and record new data or compile existing or digitize legacy data into a database called Arches database that Anton mentioned. And since Arches uses Cydoc CRM, it's kind of a use or case study of databases that can be used to store and manage your data using this ontology. So when, as a first step to think about preparing the data, we need to think about what are the type of data that in our research or project are dealing with. For us, the master project is building on previous research and compiled data sets. So some of this data set has been already gathered, recorded, collected, and then some of them has been also published by other researchers and colleagues. So we have this available stored data that was compiled into a FileMaker Pro database. And it was available on one laptop, and there were some, and as more data been added to this database, the structure had become more and more complicated. And when we started to look at this first data set at the beginning, we realized that there were also some duplications and inaccuracies and cleanings that we had to do with this data set. So from one side, we had this compiled data set. And then we are also using publications. So there's information about the sites and data sets that they're in analog format and they haven't been published. We are using historical maps as a source of data itself as well, as the previous fieldwork had shown us that a lot of the mounds that they're identified on these maps, they can be archaeology. So we're recording those mounds and any features from the maps that can have any heritage or archaeological value. And then we add those to our set of database as well. And also we have the new data coming from field survey. So we're doing field survey both with the aim of ground validating the part of data set that we want to grant truth, and also the new sites coming from this field work as well. So we have this two set of different data type that we're dealing with. We have from one side structured data, and those are the data sets that we have in the spreadsheets or in FileMaker Pro or in Access database. They have different, of course, formats and structures, but they're in a kind of a data world, and we call them more structured data. And then we're dealing with unstructured data as well, and those are the data that are coming from documents, the books or site descriptions that we're dealing with, images, maps, and if for your research and projects you're working with audio and videos, they're also part of those unstructured or unorganized data. So from one side in this work of the data mapping or digitizations, from one side we have to look at our data source, and from the other side our target. So the target, our target, as I said, is Arches database, and Arches uses the data structure that comes with Arches is very custom-based graphs or resource models, what they call resource models. The data collections is very standardized, and all the vocabularies and the terms that you want to record in the database, there also can be very standardized, and you get drop downs for each terms that you want to record in the database for your each fields. And the ontology behind the scene, as I said, is SciDoc. You can add other ontologies if you want to, but we went with the built-in SciDoc CRM ontologies for all the reasons that Anton was mentioning. But we make some customization to this graphs, or what you can see in this picture is one resource model or graph for one category of the data that's been recorded. And by category, I mean there are different things like sites, of course, that you want to record, but you might also want to record information about your images, your maps, your activities. So each get a different structure, and it can be as detailed or not based on the data that you're dealing with. So the process then of data mapping starts, that we have from one side our data either in a structured way or unstructured. From this we have, as Angela showed you, the site records, we have our publications, and we have our data coming from data coming from FileMaker Pro database as well. And then it goes mapping from this to, for our case, usually when you do this mapping part, it usually from a less structured way to a more structured place, let's say. So in this practice of mapping, we need to look at all the fields that the data has been recorded, and not only to understand what are the fields or the field names, like name, what are the things that it's recorded under names. You might have descriptions, alternate names. So it might be, this is just a sample of the type of fields that you might have, but it becomes very complicated when more fields are added. And also you need to know all the values in each field to understand better what is the purpose for each field to record with the examples. So you have to study the examples, what exactly is recorded, and the fields to understand then how you can map that or model it into this new structure. Not only we need to understand what's been already recorded in your site forms or other legacy data that you're dealing with, but think about the future use. And that comes when we go to the field and we want to gather new data. So what are the fields that we want to include coming from legacy data? And if there are any missing information that we want to be able to record. And very importantly, since we are working with different collaborators in India and Pakistan, we had different meetings with them to understand what are their needs and what are the exact information that they want to record to create our models. Then it was a question of understanding CRM and see how all the fields, if I'm recording my names or if I'm recording location of the sites, where should I put or kind of link those information into SciDoc nodes or entities, as Anton mentioned at the beginning of this day. Then in the kind of the easiest way is to use your pen and paper and start to draw your fields, the category of information that you want to record, whether you're recording information about condition assessment, whether you want to record information if we are fine. So whenever I have a site, I want to know where it's located, of course, the location, what type of site it is, what is the period, but then you can decide if you want to add finds to it, if you want to add condition assessment to it. So these are kind of the things that you do with pen and paper, and then reading SciDoc CRM to see for each of these entities or things that you're recording, what is the corresponding SciDoc entity that you need to use, and what are the properties as a linking between the two. Then we get to the next stage of actually working with our data. We had And this can happen in parallel or one after another, depending on your number of people working for your research project and kind of the priorities that you have. So with the digital data that we have, you need to go over it and map it to now the new structure that you have with, say, Azadeh CRM and Arches, and also clean and see if there are any inaccuracies, if there is anything that needs to be corrected. For our analog data, then you have to type in all the information, but in the kind of the correct or kind of places or the fields that you define for your new data structure. This is to show you an example of how you can map this data from analog or kind of a description in a book to the field that you then identified in for us in our for Arches. So the first part of the information, kind of the description, is information about the names and survey number. So that can go into wherever I'm recording my site name and survey number. Then I have my locations information, and that goes to the location part of the database. And then when you read, you have information about size of the site, so you have the measurements, and then I have information about my finds. So there is a find category that then I decompose this information into. So I have 3 of this kind and a few of that type of finds. And then mostly in these data sets, we hope to have information about the periods and chronology of the site. And then we record that in that section. Just one thing to mention here with this example of chronology, and that's the sort of the interpretation or kind of the extra work that we do. And I was mentioning at the beginning that we get this data from other researchers and other archaeologists, and then we add our own interpretation and also architecture of how we want things to be recorded. Let's say that because we're working in both India, Pakistan, a large area, and there are different periods in a granular state that can be used, we decided that at top level, we only use the broad categories for periods. So then we need to map these periods that comes from publications like Buddhist period to our top level category. For our project specifically, we use different templates. Our data doesn't go directly into Arches. You can do that. You can use Arches and type information directly into Arches. But because we're working with this huge amount of legacy data that we want to clean before pushing into Arches, we decided to use 2 formats, one in as a CSV and the second one in a GIS platform. And the reason that we decided to go with more GIS and especially QGIS, because it's open source, is because we have a lot of information or points in one area, and we need to be able to do a sort of spatial analysis at the same time, especially to identify duplicates. So it was easier to, when we type all the information from the books, just to directly add this information to our standardized kind of template that we developed for our project, and then at the same time look at the location on the map and then make any decisions that we need to about their location. And talking about the duplication and data quality, so at the same time of both doing digitization coming from analog, but also working with the legacy data set that we have, we need to think about how good quality, we need to think about the usability and understandability from one side, and if there are any mistakes or any information that we want to go back maybe to the source, primary source, and see if there has been any mistakes or any missing information might be from the primary source that we want to add. So to give you examples, this is an example from the first set of data that we were going through from FileMaker Pro. And when we plotted those points on the maps, we saw that some of these sites with the same name they fall into two kind of coordinates, and they're recorded as two sites. And going back to one of the sources, we realized that this source uses one line to record each period. So there is one line for pre-Harappan and another for late Harappan. And when this was translated into digital format, it became as two sites for one site. So it created duplicates. So one set of cleaning for us was to find these duplicates and merge this information together. And at the same time, we found out that there are some inaccuracies, mistakes, let's say, with the second coordinates of the same sites recorded. As I said, we always go back or try to at least go back to the original bibliographic sources to make sure that there are no mistakes, and also to be able to record any missing information. And also it's important to understand, now that we're dealing with secondary for the digitized, or let's say the FileMaker Pro dataset, for us, it's a secondary source of information. And a lot of time we don't know what is the process of data collection from the primary source, from the archaeologists who went to the site. So going back to the first source help us to understand their way of thinking and recording. And that tells us how better to interpret that data. We're not only using publications or survey data sets as a source, we're also using historical maps as another set of information, and as part of the projects. And that's we had another workshop about it, and you can go on our YouTube to find out more on the use of historical maps, and how these maps will help us to identify things that can be sites. And just as a sideline, that all the metadata information about the surveyors and condition of the maps and everything has also been recorded as part of this work. And it has a different graph or resource model now in our database with the metadata recorded. And the way that we use the maps with our legacy data is that we plot, for example, let me come here. For example, we plot the legacy data points on a map, and then we try to see if the legacy data point corresponds to any features from the map. This icon corresponds to temples or shrines on this historical survey of India historical maps, and the round circle ones are the mounds. And from the information that we could see for this legacy data site, coming from Google 1996, is that the site is a tomb and defined as a site and a tomb. And looking both at satellite imagery and the map, we could identify that there is a tomb, or kind of there is a tomb temple that we can record for the site, and a corresponding mound. So very quickly, kind of this is how we relate our site both to then publication, and also that the maps that were used to help us interpret and understand the locations of the sites. As Angela said, the legacy data points, a lot of times they're just point, but we know that the sites, they have extents. So looking at satellite imagery, if the site hasn't been damaged yet and we can see the extent, then help us to identify the extent for the sites. Going back again to the source shows us that sometimes there are some digitization error, and this is not only with legacy data. With our own digitizing work, we also make mistakes, and that's why we've been doing auditing of our each other work. So after finishing each legacy data source, we have an auditing stage, kind of to go back and look at each other's work and see if there are any systematic mistakes or anything that we need to go back and look into. One thing that we're trying to check when we're doing this digitization work is the location information. During this mapping and data digitization process. So we have, as I said, used both satellite imagery and historical maps. So again, when I have my site recorded here as in Mughal at Rata.Tiba, this point is the location coming from my publication or legacy data. And then when you look at the map, you see that there is a very close mound to this point, and satellite imagery shows a mound that with the same name exists on today's satellite imagery. So this is a kind of example that shows us that the location or more accurate location for this site can be kind of moved and recorded to where the mound is. So, but with doing this, we don't want to lose the information from publication. So what we're doing with our work is recording this process of thinking or data processing, or recording the paradata for our recording stage. And what it means is that, like for the example that I showed you, the mound here is more precise location for my Ratadatiba site. And that's what I want to be used for any future data archaeological heritage monitoring or sharing with other authorities for any decision makings. So that's what is the location that's going to be shown on the database, and that I recorded as my current location. But then we have these other categories as other recorded locations, that the sites that have been recorded in legacy data, all those coordinates can be recorded. So other recorded locations include my legacy data points, but then I have my more precise location. And in the location notes or description, I can explain why this was our interpretation and why we used this information. And just before finishing, I wanted to just emphasize this of what I also started to say at the beginning of the workshop, that we're applying our own interpretation to the data set that we use, and for example, in this example, we have Derai, and Derai is a name that can be understood as a mound. So for us, when we record this site, we add this extra information that my site is an elevated mound. But at the same time, again, going into the recording paradata and make sure that all of our thinking process is recorded. It's recorded that the morphology feature or naming the site mound is assumed because of the site name includes this Derai in its name. So it's us adding this extra information. And our job is to document these decisions, and we're hoping that the work that we do with recording all the decision-making process will make a more accurate data set to be used for planning, monitoring, and research in the future. And I just wanted to thank all of our collaborators, Arcadia as our donors, and also all the other member of the teams and everyone that's named, and you can see the logo on this screen. Thank you very much. I'm going to